Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And Distress Oxide Watercolor, which I've done tons, many videos, but I've been doing it more and more recently again, just because it's fun. And I'm using a few kind of older, a little bit older but goody sets from Picket Studios. I do some watercoloring, some stenciling, a whole bunch of splatter, because that's what I love to do. And yeah, links to everything that I used will be in the description box below the video. Just expand it, supply list it all, links to everything. You can check that out. My links are affiliate links, so that just means that if you use one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. That's what helps pay the bills, fund the channel, all the things. And yeah, let's get into making these cards. Alrighty, so I'm using the Picket Studios The Right Pair of Boots stamp set that came out a couple months ago, I think, and I have some Distress watercolor paper. When it comes to watercoloring with Distress Oxide inks, pretty much any watercolor paper is going to work. I can't see any issues with it not turning out fabulous on anything, because Oxide's just... they're unique and I love them. So I generally will jump around with all different types of watercolor paper with it, but Distress watercolor paper, designed to go with Distress products. Plus it was sitting on my desk, let's be honest. So I used my anti-static powder tool on the cardstock first, and I inked up this image. So it gives you an idea how big it is, because these are the A2 size papers. So the stamp is large. And I stamped the image with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. It doesn't have to be heat embossed. I always say this with my watercoloring. Images aren't required to be heat embossed. 1, it's habit for me. 2, the raised edges keep things a little more contained, so I don't have to be so careful. And 3, it gives it just an extra something, because I use clear embossing powder, and in real life, when the light kind of reflects off it, you get that little bit of a shiny effect too. So it just gives it a little extra something. So I used several colors of Distress Oxide inks, and I just pressed them onto one of my little plastic palettes. This first little bit is real time, and then I'm just going to speed this up because the coloring I'm doing is going to be quite simple. And off to the side, off camera, I've got my jar of water and a cloth that I use to just wipe my brush. I'm using a little paintbrush here. I have also done this watercoloring using my little Distress water brush. It's just personal preference, whatever anyone wants to use, because anything works, really. And I just get the brush wet, swirl it in the ink, and paint. And I decided for the boot to do it with Salvaged Patina. And then I dropped in some Rusty Hinge, just to give it that sort of grungier sort of a look. And I forgot how much I love Rusty Hinge. When you add it with things like this, it just, especially mixed with Salvaged Patina, they just work together so nicely. Just love it. So I would drop in the Rusty Hinge while things were still wet, so it would kind of start to move a little bit on its own as well, and then just paint it in, all of it. That's it. It's pretty simple. And then for the sole of it, I used black soot. Same thing. Just painted it. So yeah. The nice thing too, like I said, you don't have to heat emboss images before you watercolor them. It is nice though, specifically with if you're using Distress Oxide inks, or there are some watercolors that are more opaque, like Distress watercolor crayons, or just different elements, things like that. If the image is heat embossed, it does help because the heat embossing being raised and being shiny kind of resists the ink, so nothing is sitting on top of the stamp lines. And with an image like this, it is a little nicer because there's a lot of detail in this image, and you wouldn't want to lose any of that detail, because all this foliage and the laces and just all of it. So again, it's personal preference, but there's pros and cons as always. So I just went through, after I painted the boot and the sole, I just started going in and filling in all of the foliage and florals. For all the greenery, I did my go-to combo of Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness, because that is just one of my favorite combos. And then for everything else, it was Wild Honey, Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet, and Festive Berries. just kind of a mixture of those. And then at the very end, I went in and added vintage photo for the laces and the flower centers. So once everything was colored, I had to fussy cut this. This set does not have a coordinating wafer die. That said, this is an actually very simple image to fussy cut. And it's deceptive because it looks very busy and difficult because it's, you know, large and detailed, but the actual outline around it, it's simple. So I had no problems fussy cutting this. This is my first time really using, these are the new Tim Holtz recoil scissors. I've had lots and lots of people asking me about these. Legit, this was my very first time using them, so I'm not going to do any sort of review or anything because I need to get used to them. I'm used to using my little cutter bee scissors for doing fussy cutting, so these are just a completely different way to hold scissors. I think people that have hand issues should definitely look into these because, you know, you don't have to get your fingers into little handles, things like that. But yeah, when it comes to fussy cutting, and you can see me doing this, honestly, and I've talked about this in some of my older videos, the hardest thing for me is when I'm trying to film it. You know, trying to stay on screen while I'm cutting. That's the most difficult part. The rest of it's easy. And with this image, you can see I move the paper more than my scissors, and I cut more with sort of the base of the blades, not the very tips. That's how you get kind of smoother cuts. And I work my way around the image, and you can see I just keep cutting off, you know, the chunks of the paper as I get around little areas. That's to get that out of the way so it's not interfering and getting in the way of my hands when I'm cutting. Just like this, I'll kind of get around this large floral at the top of the image, and then I just cut that piece off. So you just keep working your way around, and it's simple. And I find it's also easiest like leaving that little border as if it was die cut. That's also easier. When you're cutting right on the line, it can get a little more difficult around, like, you know, where the foliage is, things like that. But this was quick and simple to cut out. And then I just did the exact same thing on the second boot. And then for my background, I pulled out a couple more pieces of the distressed watercolor paper. And I'm using the Brick and Mortar 6x8 stencil from Picket Fence. Can't go wrong with a good brick stencil. Love. So I've got one of my paper inking palettes, and I just stuck the distressed watercolor paper to it. And then for this first part, I'm using just distress inks, not oxides. And I'm using Salvaged, Patina, Vintage Photo, and Rusty Hinge, and my Picket Fence blender brushes, and just messily blending these three colors onto this watercolor paper. Not worried, I'm not getting a blend here. This is all going to get, you know, layers and splatter and things added onto it. But I went in with distress inks first, and then I'm going to use the stencil, and I'm going to use those oxide inks in the same colors because oxides have pigments in them. They'll sit on top of this, which will make sense as I add it. So I just did that quick, simple blend with those three colors and the blending brushes. And then I'll pull in the exact same colors in the oxide inks. So Salvaged, Patina, Vintage Photo, and Rusty Hinge. And I'm using my little pint size paper pouncers to add the color on top. So this is going to sit on top of all that blending. And I went in with the Salvaged Patina first and just pounced that kind of in the same area where I blended it. And then I'm going in with the Rusty Hinge. And as am applying the ink with the little pouncer, and as there's less and less ink on it, that's when I start kind of going like overlapping with other things. And I do the same thing with the Vintage Photo. As there's less ink on the pouncer, I lighten up my pressure to just kind of create a bit of a blend between the colors because they're vastly different colors. But it also doesn't need to be perfect, you know, because it's supposed to be kind of messy. And like I said, I'm going to add splatter and all the things. So I did the same thing to a second panel, and then added water with my distress sprayer, just holding it up and only pressing the nozzle like halfway, which right now looks like nothing, but there's like splotches and blotches of water all over this. And so I let that sit for just a little bit, and then pick that up with a bit of paper towel. So you get the water effect, the droplets effect. So that creates a little bit of distressing. And then to add to it, I'm going to add more splatter, but this time I'm going to use some distress watercolor pencils for this, and I used Vintage Photo and Ground Espresso. And I just take a wet little brush, I put these backgrounds into my splat box, and I just took my fan brush, dipped it in water, and then run it along the the watercolor pencil and then splatter that onto these backgrounds. So yeah, this will just add to this brick and mortar background. Love it. Like I said, you can't go wrong. I think everyone needs to have like a good brick stencil in their stash, and this is one of my favorites. It's also 6x8, which is nice because you can do, if you're someone who likes doing larger cards, the stencil's already the perfect size for that. So splattered my backgrounds, let that dry, and then I'm using the largest arch wafer die from the basic die cutting die set 1. And this one is almost A2 size, you can see. So if you wanted, you could make like a shaped card with that, but I just wanted like just that arch. I just thought it looked cool. So I die cut those backgrounds with that. And then the other die set I used is the Hello to You word die set. I only use the Hello word. The To You word in that die set is enormous. Again, if you like making big cards, these are perfection. But I just wanted the Hello word, and I die cut just a bunch of like larger scraps of white cardstock from that. And then I stacked 3 layers together with my craft tacky glue because sentiments need dimension. It'll help it also stand out a bit because I've got, you know, the detail of the boot, the background, everything's a little busy. So I kept the sentiment just like clean and simple. And then my card bases are top folding A2 white note cards. Put those into my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp the boot image with the Salvaged Patina Distress ink onto the insides of both of these cards. So get that stamped. This would also work for if you want to do, like, say, a card set and do them very clean and simple, is just stamping this image in a color of ink. It would look really pretty in like vintage photo ink, etc. You know, just stamp it in different colors of ink and then add sentiments, and no coloring needed, you know, because there's all that details there. It looks fabulous, but this is going on the inside of the card. So anyway, stamp that. And then I took one of the sentiments from the set. This is my favorite sentiment in the set. I just love it. It's the one that says, all you will ever need is caffeine, confidence, and the right pair of boots. So I inked that up with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, stamped that onto the insides of the cards. And after that dried, I then adhered my brick arches to the card fronts, and I just stick it under my MISTI to hold everything flat, let that glue dry. So got that adhered into place, and I just adhered that with glue, and I'm going to do the same thing with the boot images. I'm just going to adhere it with glue. Normally I'd be popping things up with foam tape, etc., but I wanted to adhere the sentiment on top of this because the sentiment's going to go right across the card completely, so it was just easier to adhere everything flat so the sentiment could be adhered, because it's a little more delicate, and I am not going to fiddle with adding extra die cuts or little strips of foam tape. Plus, sometimes you don't need tons of dimension. Other times, it's great. But after I got those adhered, I cut off the excess that was hanging over the edges, and then adhered the sentiments into place. And like I said, the sentiment is big. Love it. Love it. So it just goes right across there. So same thing, just stuck it under my MISTI. It's like an extra pair of hands just to hold everything in place. Let the glue have a couple minutes to dry. And then once that's adhered, I'm going to add more splatter. But wait, there's more. Couldn't resist, needed to. It's going to just finish everything off. So I just put some white gouache onto my little watercolor palette. Have my cards in the splat box. I'm going to add a little bit of water to the gouache to thin it out, and then I'm going to heavily splatter both of these cards, like right over everything. It'll just add all that texture to the brick background, plus it'll add, you know, splatter and whatnot to the main image, which I'm totally fine with. But this is just going to, in my opinion, finish it right off. So splattered that all over these cards and just went to town. And that was the final step. I decided not to add like any bling, anything. I liked them the way they were. So let that dry, and these cards were complete. So like I said in the intro, I will have links to all the things in the description box below the video. So if you just expand that, it'll all be listed and linked there for your convenience. As always, thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping and commenting. It helps a ton. It just tells the robot overlords you guys like what you see. But legit, it helps, and I appreciate it. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.